Over the last 2 years, states and municipalities have passed dozens of anti-landlord laws. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over the fact that lots of municipalities and states have passed just dozens and dozens of anti-landlord laws. And this is really a new thing, okay? And what I think that really set everything off was the pandemic. I think that the eviction moratorium and all the ridiculousness with the rental assistance programs just opened a can of worms, and it's coming to bite us landlords in the butt because right now we are in trouble of losing our property rights. But before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below, and let me know if you have seen in your local area or in your state a lot of new landlord and anti-landlord and a lot of new tenant protections being put into place, okay? I know that there has been, even here in Omaha, there has been a push for more tenant-friendly, rules and regulations, and those things, if they're called tenant-friendly, that means anti-landlord. Okay, don't think that any of these things that they're passing mean anything to landlords other than you're going to make less money, it's going to be harder for you, and you're going to have to jump through a ton more hoops. Okay, so this article comes from CNBC.com, and it says, after hard times for renters, cities and states passed dozens of new protections. And as I've mentioned before, when these places, these states and these cities pass these new protections, they don't talk to landlords. They don't ask us what we need in order to, survive, what we need in order to, make it the easiest for the tenants. No, they pass the legislation because they have in their mind that all landlords are bad, all landlords are super rich, and they're trying to screw over tenants. And none of that is true in 99% of cases. Okay, yeah, of course there are a few, very few bad landlords out there, but the grand majority of us just want to rent our properties and make a little bit of money, and that's it. Okay, we're not out there to screw anybody over. We're doing exactly what we're supposed to do. We're fixing up, the properties so that they're nice. We're keeping all the maintenance and repairs done, and we're not cheating over the tenants in any way. But we get caught up in this same net that is going after, the worst of the worst in terms of landlords. And that's why there's these housing shortages now, because people like me, we're getting out of the business. The small landlords are getting out of the business because they don't want to deal with this nonsense. But let's get into this article and see what it says. The coronavirus pandemic brought unprecedented hardship to renters, at one point leaving as many as 40 million people at risk of losing their homes. Well, I'm going to stop right there because, that's a statistic, and it's complete BS, okay? Leaving 40 million people at risk. There was never a chance that 40 million people were going to face, losing their homes at one time. No, immediately when the pandemic started and all the shutdowns occurred and the stay-at-home orders and all that, landlords jumped into action and they started working out deals and say, we were very, very generous to tenants. We were like, hey, if you can't pay, just let us know and we'll work out arrangements so that we can let you stay in the property, okay? So there was never a chance that 40 million people weren't going to have a place to live. In fact, as soon as the stimulus money started coming, a lot of tenants were paying their stimulus checks, as the rent. So, a lot of the tenants were doing right. And then, they got the expanded unemployment benefits and the child tax credit. So a lot of tenants, even if they lost their jobs, even if they lost income for a while, were never in this situation. So it's ridiculous that this article is still talking about this talking point of 40 million people, like all of a sudden, the eviction courts couldn't even handle that many people. It's completely like all of a sudden there would just be, on Monday, we have 40 million people who had evictions filed against them. No, that was never going to happen, okay? Just a talking point to push idea through so that you could screw over landlords. And that's basically exactly what happened. That the situation got so bad so quickly for tenants revealed long-lasting issues of housing instability in the U.S., caused by rapidly rising rents and stagnant wages, advocates say. It also led to action. Over the last 2 years, states and cities have passed dozens of laws granting tenants additional rights. The COVID pandemic has seen a new era of renter protections across the U.S., said Kashama Sawant, a member of the Seattle City Council. Facing this mountain of debt and a likely tsunami of evictions, tens of thousands of renters have responded by fighting back, organizing their buildings and uniting with tenants across cities and across the country, she said. And yeah, as far as I've been able to tell so far, this tsunami of evictions isn't going to happen, okay? Now, I've talked to people, there are people who believe that, yeah, as soon as the stimulus money and all the, benefits and everything run dry, then we're going to start seeing more evictions, but it hasn't been nearly what they were talking about so far. So maybe we're not going to, in my opinion, it's just not going to happen, okay? But yeah, it's no surprise that this Kashama Sawan, I've brought up her name before in other articles, talking about the eviction protections in Seattle, and it's no surprise that they wanted to talk to her because, she's one of the most radical left-leaning people possible. Pandemic interventions. Eviction rates were expected to balloon to historic levels during the public health crisis. Instead, they dropped off. That reversal was due to the $45 billion pot of rental assistance allocated by Congress. For perspective, just $1.5 billion was earmarked for renters through the Great Recession, as well as the federal and local moratoriums on evictions, experts say. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention announced in September 2020 a nationwide ban on most evictions, and despite many legal challenges, that policy mostly remained in effect until this past August. And yeah, it remained in effect till this past August, even though it was unconstitutional. And the only reason it was taken out of effect was because the Supreme Court found that it was unconstitutional. Okay, there should have never been an eviction ban in place in the first place. But there was, and now we're still facing consequences of it. And they believe in this article, whoever wrote it believes that the reason that there wasn't a huge tsunami of eviction was because of this rental assistance program. No, it wasn't. Okay, it was due to landlords working with their tenants and tenants using the stimulus money as it should have been used. Okay, that's it. The rental assistance program it had nothing to do with people not being evicted, okay? The eviction moratorium and the rental assistance program were 100% separate. In the absence of a federal eviction ban, many states and cities have kept their own limits on the proceedings in place, currently leaving half of renters in the U.S. with some protections against displacement. New Jersey and New York's eviction moratoriums will last until January 2022. LA, Seattle, and Austin also still have citywide bans in effect. Meanwhile, since federal rental assistance has been slow to reach people, Oregon, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, and Washington, D.C. allow renters to temporarily pause an eviction against them if they can show that they're in the process of applying for the aid. So yeah, if you're in the process of applying, whether you qualify for it or not, whether the landlord ever sees a penny, guess what? Your eviction is paused. So they essentially still have a form of a eviction moratorium in place. And that's unfortunate. Before the pandemic, the federal government had never issued a countrywide ban on evictions. Locally, after certain natural disasters and the September 11th terror attack, governors and courts announced just 1 week or 2 week moratoriums. A new era for renters. Other nascent policies will likely outlive the pandemic and aim to address deep-rooted problems for renters. Before COVID, 1 in 2 renters in the U.S. were considered rent-burdened, meaning a third or more of their income went to their housing, according to the Government Accountability Office. Many tenants spent over half of their earnings on their rent, research shows. And that's going to continue to be a problem because, simply put, it's not like these places became less expensive after the coronavirus pandemic. You're not going to go up to New York and they're going to be suddenly, oh yeah, you know what, after the pandemic, everything's super cheap now. No. Even with these protections in place, there's going to be a very large group of people who are unable to afford the rents in expensive places. That's just the way things are, okay? And the only relief they're going to get from that is if they move. I'm going to keep it simple. If they move, then they're going to get some sort of relief from that. But yeah, a lot of these localities have put in a lot of new regulations. I've gone over them before, okay? Like, for example, the rent control up in St. Paul and Minneapolis, the good cause eviction laws up in the state of New York. If you go to places like Seattle, they've put in stuff where you can't evict students and teachers during the school year. I mean, come on. I mean, we're talking about just all sorts of new crazy laws that are putting tons of regulations on landlords all throughout the country. And a lot of it was, already in motion, but some of it just started after the pandemic because they didn't want people to be evicted. And so we're going to see the long-term consequences of this years down the line. But if you're in a place where they're trying to put these things in, you should fight it. I mean, that's all I can say. If you're a landlord and you're facing all these new rules and regulations in place, go and tell your city council people, hey, for every penny that I have to spend to comply with your new law, I'm going to have to charge that to the tenants. That means my rents are going to have to raise. And if you put a cap on my rents, I'm just going to get out of the landlord business entirely. Okay? Go tell them the truth, because that's exactly what landlords are going to have to do in order to survive. They're not going to go bankrupt trying to subsidize the living of somebody else. I wouldn't. That would be completely ridiculous. Who in their right mind would do that? It's like, well, I'm going to pull money out of my bank account so that this person over here can live for cheaper than they, like, yeah, no, I'm not a charity. I am a business owner. I own rental properties, and I deserve to make a profit off of those properties. And if these laws and rules and regulations don't allow me to do that, then I'm leaving the business.